Start. So welcome everyone. Welcome to another event of Startup Grind in Tel Aviv. I'm really excited to have you here today. My name is Liron Glickman and I'm the co-director, but also working with startups on global business development. And I'm always happy to get to know different figures, different people who's made it, and we can learn so much from their experience. And unlikely, we actually have a guest from the US. Usually we have different Israelis. Today, I'm so excited to have Scott Schreiman with us. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing great, Manon.
Oh, sorry.
Is this it was on, now it's not.
Do you want to take mine? Yeah.
No, I think, okay, maybe
Now
it'll stay
recording.
on now. Is this okay? Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
שלום, שלום, מה שלומך?
שלום, בסדר גמור. אני מצטער, אני לא אעביר את זה בעברית, כי זה לא מספיק חזק עכשיו. אני עובד על זה, אבל אם אני ממשיך, זה כולם תסבלו. אז בואו נעבור לאנגלית.
Well, fortunately, the format is about having those interviews in English, no matter where you are in the world. So we're doomed to have it in English, but it's not such a bad option. But he knows Hebrew. He understands what you're going to talk to one another. So you'll share it much better than me. But you know, we have, I mean, the commonalities between so many people, so many entrepreneurs, obviously in Israel, and people like yourself, is that this country, this ecosystem is very important for us. And through your story, which you're going to learn soon, you're going to understand how not only important it is to you, but also the actions that you chose to take and the vision. And it all starts actually way earlier when you were even here in the army. So if you can just give us a brief like overview of your experience and what brought you to becoming an entrepreneur.
Okay. Yeah, this
You
is.
should take mine. Yeah.
Okay.
Much better.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I will start by saying I'm an entrepreneur like you guys. I have had a couple of exits. They're good, not great. It's not the biggest in the world. I've had one failure. But I have learned a lot over the years, and I'm happy to share whatever I can as we go through the interview. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. My story is a little bit unusual. After university, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and so I ended up coming to Israel for fun. Actually, it wasn't out of Zionist or anything like that. Honestly, if I'm being honest, it was, you know, the girls are really cute and I'll get a job and do something for a couple of years and then move back to the US. Just so happened I came here during or just before the first Gulf War, and through that experience I fell in love with Israel. I made Aliyah, I served in the army, had a really wonderful experience doing that, and then at the end of my service we had some issues in my family that needed taken care of. I planned to go back temporarily. Temporarily ended up being 30 years. Met my wife, got married, kids, several startups. First one failed. That made it difficult to want to come back. And then I got my second startup, and that one went well, but it lasted for 12 years. We sold that company, and then I started my next one, built that for 4 years, and it gets us close to where we are today.
Thank you. Now this one doesn't work. Shachar, we may need some help, with that. So basically you had 2 exits.
Yes.
And then through those 2 exits, which we're going to talk about, you decided to create another startup, which is, I guess, something, you know, when you have your first, you want to have your second or third. I mean, maybe it's irrational, but so many entrepreneurs, you see them doing it over and over again. But this one was different. This one was really, as the topic of this session, you have a vision to reinvent the education world through AI, through some of the available technologies. So share more what brought you from 2 exits to create another startup with a different vision.
That's a great question. So when I exited my last startup, that was 2020. I worked for the acquiring company for a year, and then started thinking, okay, now it's time. I'm almost at a place in life. My children about all in college, and we still have to worry about our parents, but it's time to really think about coming back now and laying the foundation for doing that. But for those of you who are entrepreneurs here, I didn't have a problem that I needed to solve. And that's probably the most difficult place to be as an entrepreneur. If you don't know what you want to solve. I was in the IT infrastructure. We sold email servers back in the on-prem days, and I was in this, we had a gateway firewall and then a collaboration startup company. I didn't have a problem that I wanted to solve. So I started traveling back and forth to Israel to just start making connections again, network.
Can you share, sorry, a bit, what were your first startups? What was the product? And
So my very first startup, after a couple of years after I moved back from Israel, was in the entertainment space. It was called MovieWeb. It was a complete failure. We were contemporaneous with Netflix. Had we been successful, we might have been Netflix, but we weren't. Learned a lot from that experience. I did that as like a proper, true entrepreneur. I had a little bit of money from having worked for an Israeli company in New York, and the dot-com boom got started. We took that money, we moved to California, started the company, spent all that money, went on to credit cards, spent all the credit cards until they were, each one paying off the other one, probably a month or so away from failing. My wife and I had all kinds of arguments. We had a baby, and I really do believe even to this day that if we didn't have the baby, my wife would have left me because I am that sort of crazy, I guess, like an entrepreneur. But it worked out. A friend invited me to come work for him at a bank, which is where the money is. So I made money for a couple of years and then met the founder of the next startup, which was a failing company, but he and I hit it off really well. I joined that company, turned it around, saved it, and then we built it up over the next 10 years. Had a good exit to a private equity firm at the end of 2016.
What was the sector of the second startup?
So that one was IT infrastructure. So we were selling mail servers and a gateway firewall to small and medium businesses. We had about 60,000 paying small and medium business customers. To put it in some context, the year we sold in 2016, it was 35 million in top line revenue, about 8 million in EBITDA. So we were making a ton of money, but we also saw that we weren't going to be able to succeed going forward in the future with the cloud. Nobody was going to buy email any longer. Does anybody buy email? No, you buy Office 365 or Google. So we sold right at the peak. It was perfect. We spun out, my partner and I, we spun out a collaboration software company called SamePage, and that was in 2016. We sold that to a public HR tech company called Paylocity in Chicago. And something interesting in that, I don't know how many people have done this, but the entire transaction from meeting the company, pitching, showing them the product, doing the initial negotiations on an LOI, due diligence, all the way through, the negotiation, the close, the sale, all happened over Zoom. It was right in the middle of Corona. So I never once met the people who acquired my company in person, just all over Zoom.
Which is, it's amazing. But from what you're saying, I think, I would say it's kind of the real deal when it comes to entrepreneurship. And when I mean the real deal, it's like you really look for the problems to find solutions, because you move from the video, movie, to infrastructure, and then to education. So, you really focus on the process of let's see where the problem is, and you adapt yourself. It's not like you have one passion in one, sector. And I think that's very interesting. And if you can please continue with now what you were saying about the recent one.
So I was doing this traveling back and forth, and I was meeting people wanting to move back here. One of the advantages that I have is I've built businesses in the United States and Europe. I've led companies, built them successfully. One of the disadvantages is that I don't know the Israeli ecosystem. So I was trying to meet people and find a problem to solve. And then October 7th hit. And I, at the time, actually, I was in California, one of the trips back, And the day that it happened, I was supposed to do one of my Ironmans 2 weeks later. And so I was on my last long training day. It was like a swim and then a 100-mile bike ride. And I watched the news. You know, I kept stopping and checking my phone and seeing how horrible the 7th became, and realized that the world had changed, and had some silly idea that they would let me back into the Army. So I got on a plane and flew over the next day, evidently not doing Miluim for 30 years, and just sending them a picture of me finishing an Ironman isn't good enough to get back in the Army. So I tried for a couple of months, and unsuccessfully. And then my parents got sick, and I had to fly back to California in December. And then they passed away in the spring. They lived long and good lives, and I think they went nearly together, so I'm happy for them now. But it was a hard time. But what it did is it gave me time to think about what I wanted to do and really reflect on what was happening in the world after October 7th. And what we saw after October 7th was this crazy explosion of anti-Semitism on American campuses. And so then you start thinking, well, where did that come from? How did that happen? What can we do about it? And that's where the idea of the Maimonides Project. For those of you who don't know, it's in English. Maimonides is basically the weird way of saying Rambam. So I don't know if anybody doesn't know that, but that's what it is, and I can talk about sort of the inspiration for that, but I think it's fairly obvious.
Yeah. So this really tough year, personally and obviously nationally, made you really take the next step. And and I would like us to go deeper into the Maimonides company. But before that, you mentioned, and I want to stop on that a bit more, talk about that a bit more, about the fact that you're doing Ironman. But it started much earlier. When you're an entrepreneur, I mean, you have to go through so much. And I saw, obviously, firsthand, and many of you felt, and me too, I guess, as a business owner, burnout and tough nights. And you work with the US, so you need to work different hours. And I saw many friends, entrepreneurs, who, they smoke, they drink, they do whatever they need to stay awake to make sure they do it. And it burns you out, and it breaks you down. And you had 2 startups, and at some point you realized that, hey, how can you move on? And I want to, if you could please share the story of how you managed to handle that in order to be sufficient enough for the next initiative.
So I think, honestly, I didn't handle it well through all the years that I built my first startup. When we sold Carrio at the end of 2016, I was 15 kilos heavier than I am now. And I woke up one morning and I felt old and I felt worn out. And I was turning 50 that year, and my daughter, who just made Aliyah, one of my 3 children, but she made Aliyah a month ago, she went through some really hard times in her life. Some bad things happened to her. And we had just sold our company, and it was a great exit. We made money for everybody, our founders and the investors and the employees. It should have been a happy time, and I felt old and worn out, and I felt overweight, and I felt tired, and I didn't want to go to work in the morning. And that's, you're just starting out on your next startup. You've got a team of people, they rely on you, and I felt like, oh, what am I going to do in my life? And excuse my language, but at that moment, laying in the bed, and my wife next to me still sleeping, I said to myself, fuck that. I am not old. I'm not going to be old. I'm going to change everything. And so I started thinking about my health as a credit card, and that I'd been spending on that credit card for 20 years, and now it was time to pay the bill. And so then I just made this decision. I'm going to change everything, change my eating habits, change my workout habits, and we're all entrepreneurs. What do? You set a big goal, right? So my goal was, I've always thought triathlon would be cool. So let's do an Ironman before I turn 55. I gave myself 5 years, said, I'm going to figure out how to do this. I hated running. I didn't really know how to swim. I had no idea in the world how I was going to do that, and I was overweight, and I felt like I was even pre-diabetic. There was like tingles in my feet. It was pretty bad. And then my wife wakes up. She's very level-headed. She's a social worker and doesn't like taking any risks whatsoever. And she wakes up and I tell her, honey, I've got some news to tell you. I'm changing my life. I'm going to change my eating habits. I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to do an Ironman before I turn 55. And she's like, that's great, honey. Why don't you just stop eating chips? I don't think she believed that I would do it, but, and it's real, that's actually true, but I did. And if there's one message, well, there'll be maybe several things that I'd like to convey. I try to live my life where I don't regret things. I try to make the best decisions I can with the information I have at the time, and then live with the consequences. Learn from the mistakes and the failures, but I try not to regret. On this, I regret not doing more in all the years that I didn't exercise. If you take care of your health, it's free. And not even just doing like the Ironman. And what I mean by it's free is if you really make the commitment to take care of your health as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and you spend that hour a day to like really take care of your health and exercise and make that choice, you will get more than an hour back in better brain work and more time. You will feel happier and healthier and stronger. It's free. It just requires that you make the choice. And that's hard, right? You're tired, it's the end of the day, you've had all these meetings, you're stressed, all you want to do is sit back and relax. Do the hour, make that choice, and you will not regret it. And then I lost 15 kilos, and I feel much, much, much younger today than I did 7 years ago. I have endless energy, and I love triathlon, so I'm kind of crazy. You don't have to do triathlon, just get up and move, do something, and make it a habit. Like, do it every day. You will be a better leader. Can't guarantee that you'll be successful, but it'll improve your odds.
So that's a great story and a great point. And I would take the maybe the fact that initially your wife wasn't sure you're actually going to do it, and I take it also to the entrepreneurship world where obviously you did it, but also there you get so many people that are saying, okay, that's nice, I don't really believe in you, and you need to stay strong either to take care of your health, same as you need to take care of your business. And yes, when we are going back to the Maimonides Project, you see it as a moonshot, and moonshot by Google X, it's really creating something which is different, which is a game changer, which you're kind of aiming for the moon. And what does success looks like to you when it comes to this project, and how do you plan to measure the impact of it as the product? And you share more of the product soon, but
yeah,
how do you see it?
So that's a great question. Obviously, I'm building this as a commercial company. I'll say something about my politics, kind of to back up for for evaluating how it's successful or not. I studied undergrad economics and philosophy, and so I have a very strong libertarian, like lowercase l, not the party, they're kooks, but the idea behind it, free market capitalism, freedom, democracy, are the best ways for a society to grow and develop and create prosperity and avoid tyranny. Somehow in my life, I spent a lot of time studying, as a kid, World War II and World War I and world history and all of these things, and I see the dangers that the ideas behind communism and such have brought forth, the staggering number of deaths in the last 150 years caused by these ideologies. and they've persisted for a long time under different names, and we see it today in this, whatever you want to call it, woke ideology, something. I call it progressivism. It's not very progressive, but it's just as bad as communism. So how do I measure success? One, the opportunity is enormous, right? If you can truly reinvent the education system, the numbers are staggering, right? You'll have financial success. You'll see it financially. But what's more important is that you see what I want to see and be able to measure is that people look back on this and say, we needed this as a society, and this saved us from some kind of existential threat. I hope it's not too dramatic to say that I think what's being taught in schools today in the United States is dangerous to our entire society. And if we don't change it, I was sort of going to save this for the end, but we're going to defeat Hamas. We're going to defeat Hezbollah. We're going to do something with Iran. We're going to defeat that too. And I believe that that's going to lead to an amazing period of time here. As an entrepreneur, I think there won't be a better time anywhere in the history of the world to invest in a country or do a new startup. I think it's going to be absolutely amazing, and the price that we paid is super high, but it's, I think it's going to be wonderful. But if we don't solve this education problem, it's going to come back in 10 or 20 or 30 years. And you could see a United States that is opposed to Israel. You could see something really almost unimaginable. But what they're teaching our children it's really awful. You wouldn't even believe it. It would almost sound like a conspiracy theory. But again, Oregon created a model curriculum for math that basically declares that math is racist and there are no right answers. That right answers are, I don't know, part of the patriarchy or something. I can't even make up the words that they use. It's so crazy.
The state of Oregon? You mean?
What? The state of Oregon, yeah. And so it's education curriculums are done state by state, so there's 50 of them, so some states are better than others, but you're seeing this type of really craziness happening in many, many states. California had a model curriculum for ethnic studies, which is a great idea. Let's learn about other cultures, right? On the surface, it sounds like a wonderful thing. But underneath, they were teaching anti-Semitism. I read the curriculum. The Jewish community in California had an uproar over it and said, hey, we need to remove that. So they removed the Israel as a colonizer and the Palestinians are, the victims, and Jews are white and Palestinians are brown and all that. They removed it. And so then they passed the model curriculum. So California now has a requirement for K-12 that everybody take an ethnic studies course before they graduate. All the teachers just reintroduced the content. There's sites you can go and you can get all this content. They're teaching it in the classrooms. In any case, they just ran a conference a couple of weeks ago that was supposed to be closed, the LA School Teachers Union. So it's the biggest, second biggest, third biggest teacher. And they were teaching, there's videos. They came in and there were people sitting like this in front with the keffiyehs on, and then joking about, here's how we can teach this stuff without getting fired. Here's how we can bring students to these protests, but without there being a connection. And just like joking about it, like, other people bring them, and then I just happen to show up, and wow, look, we're all there at the protests with our keffiyehs. So they've reintroduced it, and this is the state of California.
Yeah. So the problem is real, the problem is big, and we know that.
Yes.
How are you going to solve it through this company?
So I think, I'm not very religious, but I think that there's something really interesting and intriguing about the fact that AI has presented itself in a way in just very recent times that it provides an opportunity to change how the education system works. We're at the very beginning. I've just started this company. We've written a few lines of code, so this isn't anything that's done yet. This is all just based on a belief and a lot of research that I've done that we can use AI to change how the classroom works fundamentally and then return the classrooms to a more classical style of education that focuses on critical thinking, teaches kids critical thinking skills, encourages open and honest debates with each other, respectful debates, and creates a sense of virtue in the children, returning to the underlying fundamentals of what are Western society. Not teaching a particular political party or viewpoint, right? If you took all of, Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman, Enlightenment, all these philosophies, and you tried to say, do they have like one political view? No, they don't at all. Or one religious view? No, they don't at all. But there's a way of thinking that creates virtue in children that we've lost in favor of teaching an ideology that talks about social justice but creates the opposite. So I think we can use AI to do that, and how that really looks, we still have to develop. We have to create that. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here trying to pitch what my startup is. We're working on that. Rather, I want to share my experience, and afterwards I'm happy to have conversations with people, and all the people who have ed tech-based startups, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to have conversations. I think as a community, both Israeli and ed tech, we should be having lots of conversations with each other to think about how we fix these problems. And ours isn't the only way. There's lots of different solutions.
Definitely, and you're saying that obviously AI reshapes everything. I was just at an AI session in Vienna a few months ago, and someone just showed how so many sites, and you probably know that, just rewriting history and sharing all kind of obviously untruthful information because someone want to navigate it, let alone when it comes to anti-Semitism. And I think this is really important, and I love what you're saying about critical thinking, because that might be the remedy for a woke as we know it, because if you think critically, if you look at the facts, if you try to see it in a bit different way and not just doing what you were told that is right through TikTok.
Yes.
So I think that's so important, and then you're going to use AI to make sure to encourage students to do it better, to think better.
And understand them better too. Just delivering education over AI is actually sort of easy at this point.
Yeah.
What's hard, or what will be hard, and what's the interesting thing, is developing the models that really work to understand each individual child at a more profound social, psychological, and emotional level, and help them be social with each other. Right, so I talk about this as reinventing the classroom, not, the vision isn't some sort of dystopian thing where every kid is sitting in their basement with some kind of goggles on, and they don't ever interact with each other. Classrooms are important. Kids playing together is important, and so.
So you're really building, you make sure that they will have the social pillar, same as the critical thinking pillar. Now let's go a bit more into your experience as an entrepreneur. Sure. Again, it's a third company, so you come with much more lessons, experience, knowledge.
Fourth
Fourth company. Now you probably know what challenges to expect. So how do you approach it from an experienced entrepreneur point of view? Now with the startup, you're saying again, it's still in the starting phases. What some of the challenges you already had to face? What are you anticipating, and what is the approach that you have now that you didn't have before?
Okay. Is this still working, or?
You can take mine.
No, it doesn't.
We'll
Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes. It's also for recording if you.
Oh, we're recording. Okay.
Right?
I see. Let's see if this. Is this okay? We'll just go back and forth and maybe charge the batteries or something. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very broad question.
Focus on whatever you think is most relevant.
Okay, so I'll talk about the challenge that I'm facing right now, and it's at that very early stage of doing a startup. It's building your initial team.
Sorry, do you have teams here, just to know?
Yeah, good
startup
question. How many
founders?
people already have built their teams, have their founding teams?
Okay.
How
Good.
many still need to build a team? Okay. Well, then I
A little
guess
bit, a little
maybe
team.
maybe I'm.
Small team.
Team is like
Higher.
founders, or team it's like workers.
Well, so it depends on the different stages, right? So there's what I call sort of the very founding stage where you're getting your very first group of people, whatever function they have to be, however many that is, and then you've kind of got that initial set of employees, right? So maybe your first 3 or 4, and then your first 10, right? Those are two distinct, separate phases, but very, very interrelated. When we all read about startups, and everybody says, oh, people are the most important thing. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? And so maybe this is more relatable when you start thinking about bringing in other people. But the first thing is the first team members, those people set the foundation. They set your DNA. So you need to take a lot of time to do that and do that well. I don't know if I said this or other people have said it. I don't know that it's all that special, but that founding team will not, if you get it right, it doesn't guarantee you success. But if you get your initial team wrong, it will guarantee you failure. My second startup, taking a little bit of a detour, so I joined that company when it was failing. It had already been founded, it had grown, it had done nicely, but then it found itself in all kinds of difficulties. Like a lot of tech companies do, they grew on the technology and they didn't have any policies, procedures, there's just nothing, no controls, no leadership, no proper management. But the founders, there were 3 guys, and they were from the Czech Republic. They started the company when they were young, and one of the guys was a sociopath. And for a long time, we were able to keep him under control. I gave him a fancy title, VP of Research, and no employees. I didn't want him to actually damage any employees. And we gave him a plant and told him to water the plant and gave him a nice salary. And that helped through a lot of years. But then we got to a point where, and I ran interference. I took care of, he would, every once in a while, he would have a good idea. He was technically very smart. Sometimes he would have a good idea, but he would just bother the development teams. And at some point, the development teams all knew that all they had to say was, look, Tom, great idea. We're going to think about that, and we're going to go talk to Scott, and we'll put this in our planning. And then I would run interference and take care of it. But he almost killed the company at the end. When we were trying to sell it, he was a big fish in a small pond. He had a nice salary, a nice title in a town in the Czech Republic that wasn't yet like big technically. And we were going to sell the company, and he was going to lose that. And he almost killed the deal. Like, I won't dive into all of the gory details. It was awful. 2 weeks to close the deal of not sleeping. But the night before he was supposed to sign, he turned off his phone and he went on a trip to a forest in Germany. I'm not kidding you.
Great timing.
What?
Great timing.
Yeah, and he did it on purpose. He did it deliberately and didn't come back until the Sunday night. The acquiring company is private equity, so they had like 10 people that they flew over from Texas. And they were all sitting in the hotel, and they're screaming at me, and my bankers are screaming at me, and his bankers are screaming at me, and the lawyers are screaming at everybody. And we're like this close to failing the transaction. Like, we're now outside of the covenants that we had. And he comes back Sunday night, turns on his phone. I go and meet him in the office. I have to be really, really nice and kind to him. Because even though he didn't have enough shares to control the company, he had enough to ruin the deal. Because if you know, you have to get like 90% of the shares typically before they'll close. You don't have to get 100%, but typically you have to get 90, and he had like 16 or 18%. So he could screw up the deal. Yeah. And we sat down in his office, and he opens up the definitive agreement. And the definitive agreement with all of the annexes is more than 1,000 pages, and he starts reading like the first paragraph. Like, okay, what about this? Why did you do this? Like, yeah, Tom, we're not going through that. That's not happening right now. You're either signing or you're not. Let me know how this is going to go. And every decision is connected to 1,000 other debates and decisions I couldn't possibly remember or tell you, and we're not going to go through this whole agreement right now. And so eventually he signed, but picking your founding team is so critical to get right. Take the time to do it right. And then when you're hiring, so maybe something more practical. I don't know how esoteric that is, but I've had a philosophy about hiring that I've done for a long, long time, and I think it's really, really helpful. You can find a person who has the skills that you need. It's easy. We're in technology. Anywhere you can find somebody who can do the task. And so many of you have probably hired people. You've gone through, whether it's on paper or on LinkedIn, the stacks of resumes. I try to find the reason, and you have to say no to people. I don't know how many of you feel like bad about this, but as you've been hiring, you like look at 50 people and you go through them, and it's like you make a decision about somebody's life in like 30 seconds or a minute. And if you do this enough time, like thousands and thousands of times, you just start to get sad. Like, okay, no, right? I try to find the why. I try to find the yes. I try to find what they've learned, how they handle failure in their lives, and I start from the back of the resume to the front, and I try to build a story of their life. I try to build this mental picture. Who are they? What have they gone through? You see the gaps in somebody's resume or a change in their position. I don't look at it as a reason to get rid of them. I look at it as a reason to find out what they learned. And so I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been teaching the people who work for me to do that, to really understand who the person is and try to build that, and then understand that interviewing is a two-way street. When you're sitting there and you're hiring somebody, you feel like you're in a position of power, right? You get to hire somebody, particularly if you're young and you're doing this the first time, or you're doing this for the first times in your life. It's easy to think, wow, cool, I'm on the other side now. But here's the thing. If you do it wrong and you don't really find out who the person is on the other side, and they're the wrong person, it costs you a ton on the other side to figure out, oh, they're not working, and put them through a performance improvement program, and then this, and then you fire them. And in the meantime, they've created a toxic environment. The cost to you of hiring badly is much, much bigger. So treat it as a two-way street. Treat it as a conversation, and get them to open up and tell you about their lives. You learn so much about somebody, and sometimes you find the diamond in the rough. One of the companies that I'm advising right now, it's a startup in Minneapolis. The founder is Indian, and they've hired all their engineers in India. And in India, all they do in the interviews is like they start with the skills exam, and then they have the interview, and the interview is all just like about their skills. And I've been trying to teach him, don't do that, do this differently, but that's the culture. So finally he did, and he was interviewing an engineer, and the engineer talked about how he really loves art on the side. And it turned out that this guy really wanted and was like falling in love with the idea of doing UI and UX. And now, 6 months later that he's been on the team, he's like made this huge impact. And this is a young guy, somebody just out of school, maybe he's like 20, 21 years old. And you would never have found that out if you did interviewing sort of the traditional way.
Yeah, so I love from what you're saying, first of all, your sensitivity to people, and also it seems like your journey, made you really look more than just, if it's the mission, if it's the vision, if it's the people, if it's the Zionism, and I think it's really beautiful. And as you say, you pay it forward, you share it with your companies, with people.
It's even more important than that. Even if you're just if any of you are just terrible people who just want to make money, right? The best way to do that is to actually understand that in our world, in the technology world, everybody can get another job. So I try to treat employees as volunteers. And it's a very different mindset for thinking about how you relate to your employees. And if you treat them as volunteers, in your own mind, it changes how you think about it. Look, your best employees are volunteers, right? Your worst employees, you're going to have to work overtime to get, to move them out into something that's better for them. But if you don't treat your employees well, your best employees are the ones who are the volunteers. They'll go out and get different jobs, and you'll be left with the ones that aren't so good. So even if all you care about is making money, the best way to do that is to treat your employees like volunteers. And there's a phrase that I teach my teams, which is you respect your people by challenging them to grow and improve. Because that's what people want. Most of you should already know this. If you don't, if you look at any survey of employees like around the world, and at least in the developed world, what they value the most, it's not money, it's meaningful work. So you need to try to find a way to create meaning in whatever your company is that it's doing, and then make sure that you're treating your employees like volunteers, so they want to be there and give you their best.
And as you said today, it's obviously, there are generally a lot of jobs in the high tech, and you can find work in high tech, but you also aimed for Israeli elite intelligence units, people who are probably like used to be there, which these are the people that usually have really easier-ish time to find jobs. They also, being in the army, it's also very meaningful, and many of them looking to do another meaningful work in the market. So what is your way to recruiting these specific people?
Well, so...
Give us the tips.
The tips, well, first, I think you have to do a lot of networking, because I don't come from that background, so I don't have those connections. So you need to find people who are going to introduce you to the people who will actually bring, where you'll run into those people. So through one friend of mine, I was introduced to another friend who was running a meetup on like biology startups, and I went to that. There's a phrase I have called "make your own luck," too. You know, most startups depend on some luck, right? But if you want luck to happen, you kind of need to do your best to be there so that when it happens, you can take advantage of it. So I went to this event, and I didn't understand a word about what they were talking about on the biology side, but my friend said, hey, here's this group of people from Maimonides and some of these other groups, and I started speaking to some of them. And out of a group of 4 or 5 of them, one of them found what I was saying interesting about what I wanted to do with education. He's here tonight. This is Meitav. I haven't introduced my first co-founder, but I will even say, and maybe embarrass him just a little bit, he's still serving in Maimonides, so he's a really special guy just from that, but he started his army journey in Yahalom and served there for, 3 years?
It's a combat,
Yeah, and then was selected in a special program to move from Yahalom into Maimonides. So he's definitely, after this is over, talk to him. And if any of you are thinking about joining a startup, ask him why he joined me. But we're now working together for 2 months, and it's so why people from special units? If this is a moonshot, I want to do something that is seemingly impossible, and who knows what pivots we'll make. We're just at the very beginning. A lot of engineers are happy to tell you why the thing that you want to do won't work. And in a lot of cases, that's fine, that's important. If you want to do something impossible, you want to find people who, from an early age, have been given a task to go and do something impossible. You know, how do you get bombs in a beeper? Somebody figured out how to do that. It required a lot of really clever thinking from a lot of different people, and they do this stuff every day, and that's how they're raised to do it. So for a moonshot, I thought, yeah, that would be great, and it's an awful lot of fun to work with them too. So I don't have a lot of secrets on that. I've had one success so far, and we'll see where it goes from there.
And you're aiming high. That's incredible. From everything you said, if you see it from your health and from, again, your vision and the next startups. And I want to ask you one question before we move, one last question before we move to your questions. I always love asking this question because I think it can reveal a lot. And you probably know this question is, what would you say to your younger self with the experience that you have now? With Scott, that now is about to start his first company, what would be the main tip that you wish you knew then?
Oh, jeez. Don't argue with VCs.
Oh, is there a story behind it? Because it sounds like a very interesting tip.
Yeah, so my first startup that failed, I had some really great co-founders, and a friend of mine from high school actually was the one who started TechCrunch. How many people know the name Mike Gallarrington? Yeah.
TechCrunch?
So he started TechCrunch, and he's a couple years younger than me. When I moved back to California from New York and we started MovieWeb, I went to Mike and said, hey, we need a lawyer. He was working for a firm called Wilson Sonsini. Wilson Sonsini was the top law firm in Silicon Valley, and he was a junior attorney working for a guy named Jim Strawbridge, who was one of the very best partners. So we had like the best law firm, and we could get introductions to every venture fund that we wanted to, and we went and pitched every single one of them. And we saw the stupidest stuff taking place in the first dot-com boom. Those of you who are old enough to remember just the insanity, I was happy to tell them why I thought that they were stupid. I won't say which venture fund it was, because they turned out to be one of the best, but during the time that we were pitching them, this kid on a napkin wrote that he was going to sell furniture online. And they gave him a $4 million pre-seed round. No employees, no POC, a napkin, literally. It was a $4 million round. On a napkin, I'm going to sell furniture online. And then we were pitching in the middle of this, and even before we got to the point where they said no to us, they led another round to put 10 million in like 4 or 5 months later. Furniture.com, they bought this domain. And for anybody who's like willing to think about it, shipping furniture in the United States from anywhere is ridiculously expensive, and people want to sit on a sofa, piece of furniture, before they buy it, right? It doesn't work. And then you have the return costs, and they were accepting unlimited returns. So there was no way. The unit economics of that business were like immediately from the start way negative. There was no way to make this business successful, but they were putting money in it like crazy.
It was the 90s, and
Yeah.
anything that would have like .com and then selling on the internet
Yes.
would work.
So I told most of the VCs that they're making stupid mistakes. And the thing is that I didn't understand their business model. And their business model is, they know that 6 out of 10 are going to fail, 3 out of 10 might return the money, and 1 might make it. And so there was a market. The public markets were taking these companies, and they could go public, and the VCs made tons of money investing in lots of stupid ideas. So they were really smart. They made tons of money for their limiteds. The retail investors who bought this crap on NASDAQ, well, when 2000 came around and the markets crashed, they all lost all their money. But the VCs were smart. And so, yeah, telling them that they don't know what they're doing when you're relatively young, probably not a smart idea. Maybe it's not the best.
Today it's a different story, obviously. It's a different game.
Maybe that's not the best idea to pass on, but
Yeah.
that was the first one that comes to mind.
Well, also, it's interesting because it was different times, and you were here to see how the whole tech and obviously VC's approaches changed throughout the years, so it's also really interesting. Okay, so guys, who wants to ask Scott a question? Yeah, your name and your question, please.
Hi, Nir. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll repeat your question as well, Nir.
Can I ask what is the required
Yeah.
skills? Sorry. Can I ask what is the required skills for entrepreneur? What you think is the most required? What's you think technical skills? Also personal skills?
So, I mean, if you look at the history of startups, People have started startups from every different skill set possible. I think the one thing that they all have in common is the ability to will something into existence. Doing a startup is hard, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason startups are a grind. There's a reason that the name of the group is Startup Grind, because they're hard. They're lonely. You have to be a little bit crazy. So maybe there's the answer. You have to be a little bit crazy, and you have to be willing to put in the effort, and you have to be willing to be lonely and try to pitch. And every startup idea, I try to teach this to people that I advise, or even employees, trying to explain like where this came from. Every startup idea is the worst idea in the world, because if it wasn't, somebody would have done it already, right? So it starts out as a terrible idea. You might think it's wonderful, and the truth is, 9 out of 10 cases, it is actually a pretty crappy idea, because you're going to fail, right? Or you just execute badly. Maybe it's a good idea, but it's hard. And so you have to be prepared to put in the effort. You have to have the mental agility to stop and know when to change direction and know when to keep going. And it's hard, but you have to have that willpower. You have to have that little bit of craziness and the desire to see it through. I think that's the only common thing in successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. Next question, yes? Okay, we'll give you. So that your name and question.
Hi, thank you for the panel. My name is Aliyah, and I have a question about AI. Also,
Yes.
about concept of how, like, AI is trained on data. So how do you deal with reinventing education based on AI? What data do you use to train AI for education? And connected question, like my concern, for example, is that many pieces of data today are like some fake news. So AI maybe in the future will be able to use this data and even to add to this, like, anti-Semitism and some ideas. So it's my concern. So I would like to hear your opinion about it.
Thank you.
So I think there's maybe two different directions. I'm not sure which. So are you focused on the content? Like, how do you use AI to make sure that?
Questions about like your business and how you train your data.
Okay.
Like what's your AI on what data you're training.
Okay.
And also what do you think about like fakeness and
Yeah.
effective?
Okay. So I think the fake news or the bad content, there's a lot of issues around that. So for our business, we're going to be expecting parents. So our initial target market will be the homeschooling market in the US. So it's individual parents. We're not yet dealing with the whole classroom. They are going to want to see what the content is, what the curriculum is that you're teaching. Now, there's only so much you can do to define a curriculum. If you have like a school background, the curriculum says, here's our learning objectives. It's like broken down by week for each of the different subjects. And you can take that, and that needs to be transparent and visible for the parents. That helps you make sure that when your AI is delivering the education, that curriculum, there's guardrails already built around that. There are real issues around, around hallucination and so on. You can mitigate some of that by having a solid, like well-defined curriculum that it has to work against. But of course, when a teacher or an AI teacher is teaching, it's going to create examples. It's going to, have, so if you're talking, say it's like a history class and you're, talking about the, somewhere in the 20th century, you really want to make sure that the AI as an example doesn't talk about, black Nazis doing something, right? So we will have to build adversarial AIs, models, to watch what the teacher is doing and have a feedback mechanism. What? Yeah. To make sure, and it has to raise a red flag. So there would be people on our side who would see, like if the adversarial AI says, this is questionable, I'm not sure if this is a good example, then it'll raise a red flag, and like either staff or on our side, or a teacher in a classroom or the parent can provide feedback. So dealing with the content, we will have mechanisms for dealing with those kinds of issues. The training will come from the parents or the teachers in the classroom. The teacher in the classroom, I'm calling a learning coach or a facilitator, where that person will then be responsible for helping make sure that, and watching kind of like, sort of like a control screen, what's happening with each of the kids, going around, talking to them, seeing how they're doing when we get into a classroom, but providing feedback into the system to make sure that the content is not hallucinating, right? But you start with guardrails around predefined content that we'll have to deliver. We'll have to come up with content for each of the different subjects that we want and have it validated by instructors and make sure that it's good content and make it available to the parents to see. On the other side, how do you train the models? How do you train so that it actually is then delivering true personalized, true differentiated education where it really knows the child? That's where it gets interesting. That's where I think like just delivering educational content, I don't think is that interesting. I think on the other side, where you really get to know the child, where you have a camera and you're watching their face, you're listening to their, how they speak, and you're doing sentiment analysis, and you're thinking about, the psychology. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they confused? Are they tired? You need feedback on that too. So one, you'll ask the student, but we know if you have children, we know that if you ask a kid how their day in school was, they're going to say, it was okay. That's not super useful for training your model. So you need the parents or the teachers or the other stakeholders in the child's education, like a sports coach or whatever to provide feedback, right? So we want our system to be also speaking to the teachers and the parents on a very regular basis and using that as the feedback and the training loop into these other assessment modules that then feed back into the teaching to give it more context to provide a personalized educational experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I have one question.
Okay.
That's for, yeah. We actually have time for really one short question. So, Peleg, you want to give us a short question? Yeah?
It might be a little early to ask, but the education sector is a kind of an old-fashioned sector, and it's also very intertwined with regulations and politics. So have you given thought to how you're going to penetrate the education sector?
Yes. It's going to be very difficult. The education system itself, sort of the public education system, if what we're doing gains some traction, I hope it will, obviously, it's going to be very much opposed by the entire education system. It will be controversial. It'll be on the news. Here are these guys trying to put teachers out of business, right? It will be very much opposed. So you can't sell into that market anytime soon. You have to sell to somebody. You have to sell to somebody else. And you need to also build your models and improve them and get the system to actually work. The US, the fastest growing segment of the education market is homeschooling.
10%.
What?
10%
10%.
of kids in the United States are homeschooled.
Yeah, and so there you have, I'll try to keep it short, but there you have parents who are willing to experiment on their children. They don't want to be in the public school system. They are actively involved. We need their active involvement for training the models. That's a really good market to start with. But yeah, you're exactly right. There's a revolution coming. I'm convinced that this will happen. So you just have to be there for when it does, and maybe we can lead it. You could take steps through homeschooling to private schools, homeschool co-ops. At some point in time, it enters into the system. We've spoken to some teachers, and the ones that are the most open-minded kind of love the idea, which I was surprised by, because it gives them an opportunity to really focus on what they got into teaching for in the first place, helping kids. But where do they spend most of their time? Grading homework and grading tests and doing all of the bureaucratic bullshit. And they're leaving the profession. In the United States, I don't know how it is here in Israel, but in the United States, they're leaving the profession.
So there is much room for,
So yes, you're exactly right,
giving
and yes, it's
solutions.
going to be a long, hard road, and I don't have any idea how we're going to solve that, but I know how we're going to at least get through the first couple of steps.
Scott, I want to thank you so much. One of the things I mostly admire and love about speaking and getting to know entrepreneurs is the passion, is the willingness to go through the journey even though there is so much uncertainty, and the real drive to make a difference. So I want to thank you for sharing with us your journey, your world, your amazing energies, and really a round of applause for Scott Schreiman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you guys. And before we finish, if you've been here before, you know that we're actually doing group selfie. And Shachar is actually a world expert in creating amazing group photos. So group selfies. So please guide us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
לירון.
תודה. Thank you.
אנחנו נעבור פה מספיק יעמוד פה, וזה מה שאנחנו משדרים לכולם, כי הם חושבים שתל אביב מופצצת, אנחנו נעלה שאנחנו נחזור עם סטארט-אפים כמו שצריך. תודה לכולם.
תודה.
טוב, עכשיו יש לנו עבודות, כאילו, עבודות זה, להזיז שולחן, לשתות מים.
טיק, טק, טיק, נזיז את הכיסא.